So thanks to each of you, and thanks to the candidates for making time during this really busy election season. We appreciate that. And to those of us who watch the event at a later date, thank you as well. Your interest and active participation in the process is very much appreciated, so thanks. Quick background. Hoboken Quality of Life Coalition is a nonprofit, nonpartisan Section 501c organization which was formed back in 2000 as a coalition of individuals and various civic interest groups. QLC came together to work on issues that affect all of us in the overall quality of life in our wonderful urban and sometimes very densely populated and often moving towards a lot of development city. We have participated in initiatives related to parks, open space, open government, the environment, development, flooding, transportation, a myriad of issues, basically almost all of which affect our daily lives. And we've hosted these forums for over a decade to allow people an opportunity to get to know our municipal office and Board of Education candidates in a fair and open forum. Given that we have this digital age in which we reside right now, it's even more important that we have an opportunity to meet people in person and get an idea of who they are as they seek to represent us. They're going to be making some pretty important decisions that will affect not only our quality of life, but the investment and use of our tax dollars. So it's good to know who they are and where they're coming from. And it's equally important that they understand who we are, who the constituents are, and what our concerns are and what our needs are. So we are taping tonight, and the link will be posted on our website, which is qlchoboken.org, and will be available through our Facebook page. Search for QLC Hoboken. Please share the word with your friends and neighbors who aren't able to join us this evening. Our thanks to the City of Hoboken, Director Leo Pellegrini, and Ed Miller, and the team here at Multiservice for making the space available. I'd like to acknowledge and thank my fellow QLC board members for making this come together this evening. We have tonight Melissa Abernathy, Tom Chartier, Inez Garcia-Kime, Esther Milstead, Shelby Smith, and temporarily on leave, Eduardo Gonzalez. And someone whose tireless efforts and dedication for a number of years is really instrumental in this happening at all. And so I would also like to acknowledge our founder and chairperson emerita, Helen Minogue. Okay, now moving on to the important stuff. I'd like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Bob Bowdon, who's a longtime Hoboken resident. He's been our moderator at most of our forums over the years. He's been a television producer. Too boring? Cut to the chase? Okay, he's an executive director of Choice Media and Education News Service, website and smartphone app. And Bob, would you please introduce the candidates and explain the rules of engagement?
Thank you. All right. Okay. So I want to just personally thank Mary, thank Melissa with the QLC, and also just on a personal note, I would like us all to thank Helen Minogue, who's in the back of the room. She was the founder of this event. Okay. That said, I believe, if I recall correctly, the timekeeping is the same as last time. 60-second opening statement, 90-second responses to questions, and then 60-second rebuttals, and then at the end, 60-second closing statements. If everyone can turn off your cell phones, please, or at least the ringers, that would be helpful. I should do that myself. And on the way here, I was kind of thinking, gee, it's too bad I wasn't in that meeting when they came up with the name for the Multiservice Center. I was just sort of thinking like how they, like, let's think of a name with some pizzazz, you know, place people will remember, the Multiservice Center. So here we are, but thank you to the City of Hoboken for the facility. So as we exhibited last time, in case you guys aren't aware, and to all the candidates, I want you guys to be aware. So this is a random number spreadsheet here, and I'll show you some examples. Each time I hit this refresh, we see the names bounce around differently, and it's at random. It doesn't mean it always changes, but it usually changes, and that's how we're going to decide the order of all the speaking tonight, with me pressing this refresh button. And without any further ado, in opening statements, of course, by tradition, we allow applause, and so I'm gonna go 3, 2, 1, 0, and that will be the opening order for opening remarks. 3, 2, 1, 0, and there we have it. So, first opening statement from Mr. Doyle.
Hello. Excuse me. Hello. Thank you to the QLC tonight for hosting the debate. I'm looking forward to a constructive discussion tonight. I'm Jim Doyle. For those who don't know me, I'm a current city council member. I've lived here in town for 30 years as of August with my wife, Leah Healy. Professionally, I'm an attorney with the United States Environmental Protection Agency. I've been there for all of those 30 years. I've been running the Hoboken Harriers Running Club since the mid-90s. Many of you out there in TV land may be familiar with me from that. I've served on the Green Team, and I'm the council designee on the planning board. Hoboken has come a long way since in the last 4 years that I've served on city council with Mayor Zimmer, and I'm looking forward to a spirited discussion tonight going forward. Thank you.
Next, Mr. Allen.
Good evening. My name is John Allen. I'm an attorney, and I specialize in representing public schools and local governments throughout the state. I also serve on the board of directors of Easter Seals New Jersey, one of the state's oldest and largest charities empowering individuals with disabilities. Now, most members of the city council have a profession, and they bring that perspective with them in governing. My profession, on the other hand, is local government. I know the law, I know how government works, and I know what it takes to govern successfully. I've done it before personally as president of the Old Bridge Township Board of Education, where I was raised. There I managed a budget of $150 million and delivered services to nearly 10,000 students. Now, I'm running for city council because I want the opportunity to apply my experience and expertise right here at home in Hoboken. Now, I'm already an elected member of the Hoboken County Committee, and so I'm already a part of Hoboken's local government. But I'm running for city council because I want to work for my home, Hoboken. Thanks.
Next opening statement, Mr. Starace.
Starace.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to thank let me get close here. I would like to thank the QLC for holding this gathering tonight, and I'd like to thank everybody from Hoboken for coming out here. Good evening. My name is Sal Starace. I'm running for city council. I've moved here to Hoboken 14 years ago with my wife and my 3 daughters. We are raising our 3 daughters in this town because we love this town. We decided to stay here. I am a union sheet metal worker, elected 5 times by my constituents. This is a position that my union brothers and sisters have elected me to 5 times over 7 years. I regularly interface with other construction unions, developers, city council, and state government. I have been entrusted by union members to negotiate collective bargaining agreements between contractors and workers. I have an understanding of how important upfront planning is to anticipate the impact of development of life today and anticipating the needs for tomorrow. Thank you.
Next, Ms. Jabbar.
Good evening. My name is Emily Jabbour. Thank you to the QLC for hosting this evening, and thank you to all of you for taking the time to be here to get educated for this upcoming election. I've lived in Hoboken nearly 10 years, and I'm a proud mom of 2 daughters, ages 2 and 5. My older daughter is in kindergarten at the Brant School, where I've been very happy to get more involved in the community through our public schools. By training, I'm a social worker. I've been working for the Administration for Children and Families, a federal agency overseeing human services programs, for the last 11 years. In that job, I've been working for an Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, and I'm the performance officer for my agency. I strongly believe in the application of evidence in the process of good governance. I've seen a lot of positive changes in the last 10 years living in Hoboken. I've been very impressed by the leadership of Mayor Don Zimmer, and I'm really pleased to be part of a team that hopes to continue the progress that she's made in our city. Thank you very much.
Mr. Aibel.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jim Aibel, and I'm sitting here tonight because I am scared to death that development is on pace to make Hoboken unlivable. My wife, Beverly Savage, and I have lived in town for almost 40 years and raised 2 children here. I've been on the zoning board for 8 years, the last 5 of which I've served as chairman. From that perch, I've witnessed relentless pressure to develop more and more residential housing. We have refused in large part to engage in zoning by variance, but the pressure remains because our master plan and zone plan are seriously outdated. But to be clear, I'm not against development. I'm opposed to it when it's not well planned, does not consider the impact on our taxes, and does not benefit the community. It would be truly irresponsible to continue adding significant residential development population to our city without knowing what our infrastructure can support or what improvements will cost. The challenge to get development right is enormous. Jen Giattino and her team will approach that task with humility and not hubris and do the right thing for our future. Thank you.
Mr. Mello.
It's been an honor to have served on the City Council for the past 8 years. Government service is always a team effort, and I'm proud to have been a key player in many meaningful achievements. A continually balanced Hoboken budget and an A++ credit rating, effective tools in the ever-present fight against flooding, and particularly of the many acres of open space that we've made a reality, because we truly live in a greener and better Hoboken today than we did years ago. But moving forward, I'm concerned about the future of our city. And that concern is rooted in the reality that today's most pressing issues all involve outside parties with considerable leverage. The horrible Suez water contract, a New Jersey transit redevelopment plan that was basically forced on us by Trenton, underserved mass transit routes, and much-needed improvements to Hoboken's entry and exit points. Today's issues require our City Council to work closely with outside parties and to never refuse to explore all potential solutions to the shared problems of all of Hoboken at large.
And Mr. Ellis.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to the QLC for hosting tonight's debate. I'm Jason Ellis. I'm running for Hoboken City Council at large and proud to be on Jen Giattino's ticket. For more than a decade, I've lived in Hoboken, raising a family here. My wife, our 2 boys attend public school, and we're very proud of that. I work in the financial services industry. I currently serve on the board of our condo association, where I oversee all the financials, building decisions, dealing with residents, dealing with local community issues. Life often becomes busy and demanding with a family, a career, and generally day-to-day obligations, but I'm passionate about helping the city of Hoboken. A few years back, I got involved when there were major changes planned for one of our city's parks. I immediately took action, had this park restored to its original design on a minimal budget. I'm proud to be part of Hoboken, and I share Jen's passion to improving this city for today, tomorrow, and future generations. Thank you.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to hit the button. We're going to reshuffle the order, and then we'll start with the first question. So hitting the button now, and there we have it. Mr. Doyle will once again begin the second round, but the other name shifted. It happens sometimes. So we've gotten a lot of questions lately, including a few nights ago and also now on development generally and also development specifically, certain parts of town. So before getting into the specifics, though, I just want to ask questions like this one. Do you consider yourself anti-development? Like this one, what will you do to control development, to preserve affordable housing, preserve historic structures, and maintain quality of life, increase, prevent increase in taxes? Okay. And so generally, do the candidates have an overall view of, do we need more, do we need less, do we need a certain kind more, another kind less? Your view of where we are in development, Mr. Doyle.
Thank you. I think I'm perceived by some as being hostile toward development or critical of it, and I don't think that's fair. the chair of the Zoning and Master Plan Committee, I'm equally criticized by some for having enabled some of the issues relating to the flood ordinance, which was before my time, but we're working through those issues. But the fact of the matter is, I am very critical of zoning variance requests or planning board variance requests. I feel that people have a right to develop their properties as the properties are zoned. And to the extent that they're seeking additional benefits, they should be giving back commensurate community benefits. And so I think there are some good examples out there of where we as a council, including Councilman Mello, have worked in the redevelopment context to get some very good community givebacks. But I think historically the city has been very bad prior to the Zimmer administration in that area. And I look forward to moving forward with sound, sensible, reasonable development with appropriate community givebacks. Thanks.
Mr. Ellis.
Thank you. Listen, since I've lived in this town, development has been, from what I perceive to be, piecemeal. And I live on the western edge where there's a tremendous amount of building taking place. Behind the Monroe Center, there's 450 units going up. They're trying to develop 800 Monroe. A third of our city is up for development over the next administration. We need to get development right. How many more people can we afford to bring into this city? Is it 10,000? Is it 50,000? Our infrastructure is crumbling. The schools currently are packed. Enrollment is up significantly. So we need to know how many more residential units we can bring in, and how do we diversify the tax base? Can we get more commercial development in here? Big businesses to come in, reverse commute, expand the mass transit capabilities of this city. The whole western edge with the light rail there and all those industrial zones would be a great area to look at commercial development. So we hope to get that right in the next administration. Thank you.
Mr. Allen.
Thank you. What I love about Hoboken is its unique charm and character. That's one of the reasons I moved here. It's one of the reasons I want to raise a family here. Our city is different from other cities, and I really want to preserve that. What that means in practice is we don't have to be opposed to development. We have to be opposed to irresponsible development. So what that means to me is, I think, number one, we need to limit residential development. I think most of us on this panel will agree on that. What I would focus on instead is promoting commercial development, especially in the northwest part of town. I live on 9th and Monroe Street, and that part of town is where there's a lot of area that's still available to be developed. And the next city council and the next mayor are going to play a very large role in what that part of town will look like. I think the team that I'm running on with Ravi Bala for mayor, Jim Doyle and Emily Jabbour, I think we have a vision and a series of skills that will enable us to accomplish those goals. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Ms. Jabbour.
So I'm going to echo much of what's been said here. I certainly believe that Hoboken is perhaps being overextended already by the level of development, and that going forward there are still opportunities for additional development, and so we need to do so very judiciously. I'm very concerned about the pressure on our infrastructure, whether that's physical with our water mains or if it's in our schools with the enrollment level. I'm certainly seeing that happen as there's been more and more residential development. I think it's important that we have a balance of commercial development. How wonderful of an experience it would be to be able to live and work in Hoboken. So as we are looking to the North End in particular, I think there's a lot of opportunities there for what's going to be done in the years ahead. I also think that there's an opportunity in terms of balancing out our city. Certainly Washington Street right now is feeling the pressure of the revision to their infrastructure there. If we were to able to create another boulevard, perhaps up in the North End, that would take some of the pressure off of the businesses there. It might also lower their rent, because then they have other opportunities for spaces that they could take up if we were to build another commercial center. So I think it's very important that we move forward carefully, that we do so in balance, and that we continue to listen to the residents and what their needs are as the pressure on our infrastructure grows with more development.
Mr. Mello.
I will echo what was said about bad and out-of-scale development versus good development. We need to move forward with good development. We also need to move forward with what we need and separate that from what we can avoid. you know, we can't take over every piece of land in the city via eminent domain and just turn it into parks. That's just not pragmatic. So we have to make sure that we minimize the development, future development, and then shape what is developed in the future as to what we need. There needs to be much more commercial versus residential. The piece of the pie of our development needs to be much more commercial going forward. And the residential we develop has to be the type of residential that's going to retain our families. It's a shame that we lose so many families every year because there's not enough units that can really hold a family that can grow in this community. We don't have enough large 3-bedroom residential units. And the other group of people that will attract is the empty nesters that have retired comfortably, can afford that type of unit, and want to move into the town where their families are being raised, where their children are raising their grandchildren. So we want to be able to attract that too. And you do that with a mix of more commercial, you're going to make your tax base healthier, you're going to make your community healthier, and you're going to make this a community that we can grow and root ourselves in moving forward.
Mr. Aibel.
Let me go back 8 years. The 8 years I've been sitting on the zoning board, the city has failed to do planning. The planning that's been accomplished has all been ad hoc and piecemeal. What we need to do is implement a new up-to-date master plan, give developers and residents alike some certainty in the way that they can approach developing their properties, and I think that's a shortcoming. I don't need to echo everybody else because I think everybody is now pretty much uniformly in favor of a balanced and focused plan that's going to be more toward commercial than residential. I'm glad to hear everybody feels that way. The question is who's going to execute it and who's going to implement it, who will have the political will to get that done. We have a lot of work to do. We have a flood ordinance that is destroying our historic areas. We need to revisit some of the zoning there. We need to review our affordable housing ordinances and make sure that they are effective and producing what we want. At the end of the day, again, we're all saying the same words. The question is, who's going to do it? Mr. Bala, in an interview some time ago, said, in addition, the north end of Hoboken has incredible untapped potential, as do the Hoboken rail yards as the 2 entrances to our city. They are very important routes, and I want people who come to this city via those routes to drop their jaw.
Wow.
Thank you.
Okay. That will be the end of that remark, sir. That was quite a loud gong there.
That was good emphasis. Thank you.
I'm just joking with you. It's a crescendo closing. Mr. Starace.
Okay, about 35% of Hoboken is still undeveloped today. It's going to be very important to have some kind of plan going forward with development in the city of Hoboken. I apologize, I have a bit of a cold right now. That's why you hear my voice like this. I am pro-development, but I'm for smart development. Like I said, you need a plan going forward. We have a lot that has to be developed here in the city. I want to bring back community development groups. People have a vested interest in the area where development is happening. I think the people who live in the area should have some kind of input on what's being built in the area. I fear population overgrowth. I believe that commercial over residential, residential I believe in as well, but I do believe we have to concentrate a little bit more on commercial, especially in the Western Edge. It'll minimize demand for services, it'll offset residential tax burden, and it'll help feed local business with daytime traffic. Thank you.
Okay, any rebuttals now? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm glad there are many common messages here, and I like to distinguish ourselves. The message that many of us want more commercial than residential is great, but the commercial development that we have seen from Councilwoman Giattino's camp has been the 290-story or foot, seeming like 290-story hotel down at the post office, which I think the commercial development that is envisioned is in the north end, which is north of 14th and west of Park. I'm fearful that it's a lot larger than what most of us are thinking. A 6 or 7 story commercial development up there versus 25 to 30-story buildings. And the only other point I would make is, and Mr. Councilman Mello and I have agreed on this for years, but the number of 3 bedrooms, regardless if there are still too many, the price of them is so extraordinary that families cannot afford them.
Any other, Mr. Mello?
If I could. I'm going to address 2 points that were made. One about the hotel. You know, I was part of that vote, and I was in support of the hotel project, which would be large enough to bring a Hilton property into the city of Hoboken. Now, that's important because some of my colleagues talked about bringing a boutique hotel onto the post office property that is steps away from the PATH train. And as much as that might sound like a nice, whimsical kind of idea to have a boutique hotel similar to Asbury Park, steps away from the PATH train, it's not pragmatic. I don't want to lay the groundwork for something that's only going to be able to facilitate a boutique hotel that's still going to be north of 80% of the size of the Hilton Hotel, but it's not going to have a place where people can hold their weddings in the city that probably has the most per capita engaged couples in the state. It's not going to be able to have corporate meetings. It's not going to be able to facilitate all those things we need. What would happen is that years later, that boutique hotel would go out of business, and you would move in a Hilton property that doesn't have those features, a lower-end Hilton property that isn't going to be able to bring tax dollars into our city.
Okay, yes, Mr. Aibel.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle needs to go look at the rail yard plan with 2.3 million square feet of space, commercial and residential design for Newark, and see the very large-scale buildings that are scheduled to be placed down there. I think the other point of consequence is the hotel that's proposed for the post office site is certainly going to be high. It's not going to be unduly high, and it's going to be consistent with the W Hotel and finish off the waterfront in a way that will integrate ultimately with the rail projects. I don't know where Mr. Doyle understands that Jen Giattino is proposing 290-story buildings in the north end.
Anyone else? Mr. Vore.
To the point of the hotel, I think what's concerning to me as somebody who's been outside of that process is that my understanding was that the business that wished to open there went in with a certain proposal, and when the committee came out, in fact, they got a much taller hotel, and that the considered givebacks in that process was the banquet space and a restaurant. And the last time I checked, both of those are for profit. Those are not things that benefit the community. I looked to a project like Jackson Street, which included a give back of 2 acres of park space and a community gymnasium, and that to me seems like a much better deal. And I'm not going to criticize to say, you know, who can do better, but when I look at those give backs, I think there's one that really truly benefited the community in a different kind of way that I'm more supportive of.
Anyone else? Mr. Ellis.
Yes. Yeah, quite frankly, they've allowed, the current administration has allowed 3 massive towers to be developed behind the Monroe Center, inundating that particular area with a lot of residential units. And we're in favor of development, getting the right development with the right height that is considerable in town, 6 to 7 stories. But in terms of that particular project, I don't feel 2 acres was enough give back. I think the current developer got away with murder. And we should have got a multi-service center put in place and perhaps other issues and items for the local community as well. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, hitting the button again, and there it goes. We will, sometimes it's good to go from a general question to a very specific question, so I have a couple cards about the same thing here. We'll begin with Mr. Ellis on this. And the question is, Suez contract, water infrastructure. What should Hoboken do about the Suez water contract? Is it time for Hoboken to consider other vendors? Another card, what is your position on the Suez contract? Mr. Ellis?
I think it's actually a shock to everybody that this floated under the radar of the current administration for so many years. And just because a purported bill was never sent into City Hall doesn't mean City Hall isn't liable for it. We need to negotiate a better deal. The next administration is going to have to negotiate a better deal, but we're going in a sign of weakness because we owe this money. I'm confident that at the end of the day, a deal will get done, but it has to benefit the community at large. The other thing is that we're giving massive contracts and not getting enough back in return. So I can tell you with the next administration, we need to look at what are we getting back in the short term and over the entire length of the contract. Thank you.
Mr. Mello.
There are other major providers that could provide that service, and we need to look into them. Some members of the public have come up to me and said, well, do you really think you could get a better deal with a major provider? And I say, I feel I'm under an obligation to find out if I can. And that is very much my obligation as a city councilman. I get concerned when we are presented at the City Council with a plan, an alternate plan for a new Suez contract. And I asked questions about what other vendors were contacted, and I'm told none were contacted. I asked questions about what comparables we looked at to see if we were getting a good deal. I'm told there are no comparables. Well, we all drink water, folks, so I don't understand how there are no comparables. I look at things like this where we see that Suez Water does a lot of sponsorships throughout the city of Hoboken, including our bike system that I think is a little bit flawed, and we should have city bikes in town. And I wonder if we made efforts to look at other alternatives as well as we could have. This Suez contract that was proposed was better than the last one. That's not saying much, because the last one was god-awful. We can't put that on our city of Hoboken. We can't do anything other than the best, and we have to leave no stone unturned in seeking the best contract for our city.
Mr. Starace.
I think we need to look into other possible providers as well. I think that we need to advocate for the best deal possible for the city. I think we have to make sure that we're fully funded going forward. And I also think that we need to own our own assets, the pipes, and we need to make the company that we contract use our assets.
Mr. Allen.
Thank you. I think we will all agree that the Suez contract that's currently in force is a bad contract for the city of Hoboken. There is insufficient funding to fix our aging infrastructure, specifically the water mains. As a resident of Western Hoboken, I deal with flooding, so I was very much so looking forward to seeing a renegotiated Suez contract. But let's face the reality. We are in a contract, and that contract is not ending tomorrow or next year. It'll be in force for another 7 years. The mayor worked out a renegotiated contract within the confines of understanding you can't just break a contract. So we're not going to be able to have a perfect deal. But I don't think we should allow the perfect to be the enemy of good. Under the renegotiated deal, we would have increased investment to our infrastructure dramatically. We would have been able to provide the repairs that we need to stop the water mains from continuing to break. I'm in some ways happy that the vote on this contract will take place after the election, because I anticipate that once this political season is over, the council will probably approve the renegotiated contract that the mayor has created. And I think that speaks volumes. So that's where I stand on it. Thanks.
Ms. Jabbour.
I'm going to echo what's already been said. I think it's very obvious that the deal that we have is a bad deal. I think the fact that we aren't able to invest in our infrastructure is obviously coming back to haunt us with the continued water main breaks that disrupt everyone's quality of life. I think that the deal that the mayor brought should have been considered. I think that her leadership over the years has shown that she has a good business sense and she has turned the city around. And I don't feel that she had the opportunity to have her plan heard out thoroughly by the council, unfortunately, because of the election season that we're currently in. It's my hope that this can be revisited once the election is over, because obviously Hoboken deserves better.
Mr. Doyle.
Yes, I echo most of. I feel that the agreement was a satisfactory agreement. I think there was some naivete with regard to the details of just jettisoning the current provider and paying a $5 million breach of contract fee, and then having to pay reap the benefits of the bad deal that was negotiated back in 2001 and 96 and 94. So I think it was the best deal we could have, and I think that I echo what Emily will say. When the silly season ends, I suspect that everyone will be honest with themselves and the deal will be approved.
Mr. Aibel.
I think it's unfortunate that people are saying this is part of a silly season. I'm glad Mr. Doyle and Mr. Allen were able to see financials that supported the assertion that this is a good contract for Hoboken. My understanding is that the rest of the council was not provided with that financial documentation. I think the rich irony here is that the council that originally, quote, rubber stamped the contract many, many years ago was roundly criticized and has been criticized through this silly season. Now when the rest of the city council decides to look at the financials, try to understand the value of the contract and what the city is actually getting out of it, as opposed to what the vendor's getting out of it, now all of a sudden we should just trust the administration. I think the city council's job and role is to provide oversight and to do due diligence. And I think it would be a breach of the council's duty not to dig deeper, silly season or not.
Do we have rebuttals on this subject? Mr. Mello.
I just want to point out that the council was left in the dark on this, and it was unfortunate. You know, I was very proud to have worked with Councilwoman Fisher is in the audience to get a line item dedicated to our water main infrastructure maintenance, because it's embarrassing. It's absurd, and it's doing our citizens a disservice to have these constant water main breaks. I also supported Councilman Russo, who's in the audience, who continually asked for details on the contract negotiations and was refused. Had to go to the extent of doing OPRA request, Open Public Records Act request, to get the information as a city council person in the city of Hoboken. This is outrageous. And yes, it was a contract that would have to be broken, but the fact is, you know, I'm lucky enough, during my day job as a teacher, I'm teaching financial literacy this year to my students. And if I were teaching them about financial literacy of a water contract, I would say, you don't get out of a bad 7-year contract by extending it for another 10 years. That is not an option that should have been considered. That's not an option that I will consider. Thank you.
Other rebuttals? All right, moving on, hitting the button. And there we have it. Mr. Starace will be first on this. It's about getting around with your legs, either riding or walking. First, pedestrian safety. Is the city doing enough? What would you like to see to improve it? And then on bicycles, where can we add more bicycle parking? Do you support the city prioritizing or paying for it? Another question, how can you give cyclists a safe, connected way to ride through town? So pedestrian safety and cycling, Mr. Starace.
Pedestrian safety is something that's near and dear to my heart. My mom was hit by a car 4 years ago last week, and she passed from getting hit by a car. So it's something that's very near and dear to me. The city council this year passed $100,000 to put into the budget to do a study on street safety here in Hoboken. And since that study has taken place, we've added 2 new stop signs in the city, one at 6th and Clinton and one at 15th and Hudson. I am for pedestrian safety. Obviously, I have 3 daughters who travel to school every day. I do think the bump outs in the city need to be reevaluated. I think that we come up with we do a study and we come up with a plan and we execute the plan, but we don't do a study to see if the plan works. I think some bump outs work and some don't. My daughter Olivia, who was 9 at the time, actually told Jen Giattino a funny thing. Jen asked her what she thought of the bump outs. And my daughter Olivia actually told her that she spends a lot less time in the street walking to school during the day. So I thought that was pretty funny. But either way, I am for pedestrian safety and bicycle safety in town, and I do think that we need to really bring it to the next level. Thank you.
Mr. Aibel.
I don't think anybody here is going to say we're against pedestrian safety. We're all very much in favor of pedestrian safety. The administration has made an effort to improve it and will continue that in the next administration. I think one of the issues that I would raise as something that we all consider is the voluntary stop signs in town. We need to either stop the vehicles from ignoring stop signs, or we have to make sure that our pedestrians are fully aware that there is a danger on our streets. So I think that's something that, as a matter of enforcement, we ought to be pursuing sooner than later. I think part of the question was bicycles and parking. I think obviously we're in favor of bicycles. We're in favor of having them driven safely around town, and we're in favor of having them parked. And as part of many zoning board applications, we now are requiring or asking the developers to provide additional bike parking. So I think those would be my comments.
Mr. Doyle.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty non-controversial question. And although I'd like to hear all the other candidates say that they're in favor of pedestrian safety, because there have been criticisms of the bump outs, and the bump outs are for pedestrian safety. They're for safety of our citizenry, and they do not interfere with the turning radius of emergency vehicles, notwithstanding what people say. They do not even extend any further than a parked car. So they're not blocking the lane of traffic. But So it's a safety issue, and I think we should be encouraging more people to be on foot or on a bike than in a car, because I'm sure we'll get a question soon about parking. And as far as bicycles, I don't, anybody who knows me, that's the only way that I get around when I'm not on a motorcycle. So it tends to be two wheels, and I'm a firm advocate of increasing, repainting, making it safe for the cyclists to share the road with the cars and the pedestrians so that we can all get along.
Mr. Mello.
When it comes to our safety measures, we have to have a commonsensical approach to it. I think everybody's happy to see the majority of changes that are being made on Washington Street. What they're concerned about is that we went to the extreme of 4 bump outs. What they're concerned about also is that there was a plan for a dedicated bike lane that was fought for up until about 5 hours before our vote, and then an alternate plan was put in front of us without the city council having the opportunity to vet that. When we don't vet it, when we don't think about it, that's where we have the problems we have. Now, as we're rolling out the plan on Washington Street, it's being rolled out en masse. The whole street is torn up. Instead of rolling out one intersection at a time, letting the public consume it and see if we need to make some revisions, we're rolling it out all at once, and we're going to have to live with it for a long time. I think that just doesn't make sense. When it comes to the dedicated bike lanes, we do need to have more dedicated bike lanes. We need to have a network of safe bike lanes, but it doesn't have to be on every street. We just need to be able to get north and south, east and west, in a variety of points in our city. When that vote came up for the redo of Washington Street, I had suggested that we have a dedicated bike lane on Hudson Street. We all know that the cabs bolt down Hudson Street trying to get back to the PATH station. It's unsafe. The people on Hudson Street would probably welcome a dedicated bike lane, and you would only be 1 block away from our shopping district. That would have been common sense. And as for the bikes, the one thing that hopefully I'll be able to touch on more later is we need to have city bikes in the city of Hoboken. We don't have to undo our system. We can have both systems side by side, but people need a bike system where they live and work.
Mr. Allen.
So pedestrian safety is also something that's very important to me. My mother lived in Hoboken until the early 2000s when she had to leave her walk-up apartment because she developed multiple sclerosis and her mobility deteriorated. That's how I got involved with Easter Seals. And one of the policy proposals that Easter Seals advocates for across the state is actually for the construction of curb bump outs precisely for the purpose of providing pedestrian safety. For able-bodied people, it may not be that difficult to cross the street quickly. But for those who can't move as quickly as others, every second that they are in the street puts them in jeopardy. Now, I think the improvements that are taking place on Washington Street go a long way. I think that that's going to help on Washington Street. But the enforcement of our traffic rules and our bike lanes, I think, has to be taken more seriously. And specifically, I'm going to point to the southwest entrance to Hoboken around Jackson Street. I am a commuter, and I use my car to get in and out of Hoboken every day. And that intersection at the entrance to Hoboken is incredibly dangerous. And I think that one thing that we can do concretely is provide for increased police presence there to ensure that traffic flow is handled efficiently, safely, and that will not only help the people who drive in and out of town, but will also help the pedestrians who cross there and by the new park.
Mr. Ellis.
Thank you. I'm going to be very blunt. You're not getting rid of cars anytime soon. Maybe in 10 or 20 years, we'll have autonomous vehicles. And the second part of this is pedestrians oftentimes are looking at their cell phones, not paying attention. So it's a combination of pedestrian safety, and it's also a matter of the people driving the cars being cognizant of everything around them. So it's a multifaceted problem. There's an issue of enforcement. I live on the corner of 9th and Monroe. Ironically, John Allen and I live in the same building. And there's a speedway right down Monroe Street, and the next stop sign is on 5th Street. Crossing that 9th Street path, and a lot of families live there, it is crazy dangerous, and I would be in favor of piloting bump outs in that particular area. But I'm going to pick on something here. ShopRite uses all their trucks. So there's no question in my mind, if we built bump outs there, ShopRite's going to be going over those bump outs. So now I have an issue if my children are on their scooters or their bikes and they ride to the end of the bump out at the same time as a truck making that turn. And I think we can look at that on multiple intersections within this town. So I'm not for or against bump outs, but it needs to be looked at where you're putting them. And if we put a bump out there and it's not working and it's not safe, we need to fix it. To touch on John's point, the southwest area, when you get into town on Jackson Street, the administration allowed that to go to one lane and created a nightmare for over a year. Why did it take over a year to fix that and finally put 2 traffic lanes there? That's ridiculous. People make mistakes. If you make a mistake, admit fault and move on. Thank you.
Ms. Jabbour.
So I'm happy to go on the record as being in favor of bump outs. To be honest, much of the time that I'm walking around Hoboken, I have a stroller in front of me. It's kind of a bus of a stroller. I have 2 children. Do you know what gets in the way of my being able to see in the street is when there are cars double parked on the corners or delivery vans. I can't see without putting my children in danger if I try and get across the street. A bump out ensures that that car can't double park on that corner, so my visibility as a pedestrian is improved, and it doesn't put my children in harm's way. And whether or not people like bump outs, you have to admit that the demographics in Hoboken have changed, and there are more children, and we have to do more to protect them before there's a tragedy that then we legislate to address. Secondly, I think the walk signals are a very good thing. How many times have you been trying to drive down Washington Street and you have people, often who are not from Hoboken, wandering out, crossing when they shouldn't be? It's because there's no walk signal. They don't know. If you go to New York City, you have a good sense of what's going on. So what we're doing on Washington Street, even though it's difficult in the short term in terms of the problems it's creating, is going to be a long-term gain, and we're all going to be better off as a community when we get through that. I also think that that means we have to address, as Jim alluded to earlier, some of the parking pieces that go along in conjunction with this. I think we need to look at whether it's appropriate to have commercial loading zones to ensure that our businesses are able to conduct themselves on a daily basis and that we don't impede their business to continue.
Any rebuttals on bump outs, bicycles, and Mr. Mello?
Yeah, I'm glad Mr. Allen brought up the southwest traffic intersections. I live in the southwest part of town, and I've seen that firsthand for too long. And it was correct to be brought up that the first road segment on Jackson Street was a mistake. And that was a mistake that I think existed for about 4 or 5 years. And it was a shame that I on the council and a lot of other council members, we had to fight for years to do what the citizens demanded. Years ago, citizens signed a petition to have a traffic light put at the intersection, the second intersection of Jackson Street. And our traffic engineer at the time said you need to scaffold up to those sort of options. So first we're going to stripe it for 1 lane. That was met with a lot of raised eyebrows, but we said, yeah, we'll give it a try for a little while. It quickly was apparent that it wasn't the right move. Then it took us years and years to actually get that traffic light funded and put into place. That's what I mean about common sense solutions. An aggravated driver is not safe for anybody.
Any other rebuttals? Mr. Ellis.
I want to talk about one other thing, quality of life. So, you know, with these parking bollards that the current administration has put in place, although great because it deters illegal parking, we are not even cleaning that area. So, you know, the next administration, when Jen's mayor, we're going to get out there, and when we're cleaning the streets, we're going to get the guy or gal out of the truck to clean around these parking bollards, which is just an eyesore. The second thing is I think we also need to work with the current police force to do random, I don't want to say stops, but have police positioned on certain corners where we know people aren't stopping for pedestrians. You put a couple of police officers on my corner, pulling over people that aren't yielding to pedestrians, that will curb people not stopping. Thank you.
Mr. Starace.
I believe that the Washington project should have been done, and I think everyone here agrees with that. I just feel like the plan was rushed, and ironically, we did put pedestrians in harm's way by rushing the project the way it was rushed. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, moving on. There we have the new list. And as I mentioned, we have more development questions than usual tonight, so we're going to try to get to some of the more specific ones now. We started with a general one earlier. So first with Mr. Aibel, what is your opinion? We're going to talk about the North End development, your opinion on the type of development that should be done in the North End. Another card reads, 19 blocks of property in the North End of Hoboken is to be rezoned under the redevelopment law. What uses do you believe the property should be zoned for? What is your definition of what a community benefit is in exchange for upzoning that area? So the North End development, Mr. Aibel.
Well, as many people probably know, the North End is now subject to an evaluation and an assessment that is going to involve the community in determining what will be zoned in that industrial area. Right now, it's a 30-acre open space. Everybody understands there's quite a bit of open bus parking, which is going to get replaced by a much more desirable and a better rateable commercial development that will be mixed with some retail at ground floor. And if I had to predict, I assume there will be an element of residential in there as well. We have to also keep in mind that the north end is not alone. There is the Western Edge redevelopment plan that's already in place, covering 11 acres from the 9th Street rail stop up to the viaduct. That will include residential towers and other, other construction. So at this point, what I would say about the north end is we have to make sure that it's got appropriate transportation, because I think to make commercial successful up in the north end, we will have to make sure that there is transportation, whether that's a light rail or 2 light rail stops, hop buses or other ways of getting people around. We'll certainly have to do that. Thank you.
Mr. Ellis.
Yeah, this is going to be a real hot topic and a big undertaking by the next administration. And I'm going to echo a little bit what Jim said, is we need to start with a proper plan. We need to look holistically at the city of Hoboken, who currently lives here, what kind of traffic is coming in and out of the north and south parts of town. We also have to look at our neighbors. We need to factor in what goes on in Jersey City, Weehawken, Union City, because I'll give you an example. We all know Jersey City is building massive residential units on the southern end of our city. We need to take that into consideration because it affects our roads. It affects how we commute within our town. When these developers move in and want to develop these parcels of land, they have to give back by doing infrastructure improvements, not to that street, but the surrounding areas. We need to get more from these developers when they do that. Thank you.
Ms. Jabbar.
I'm going to revisit something that I mentioned earlier that I think is very promising about what's going to happen in the North End, which is the possibility of creating a new boulevard for Hoboken. I think it's important that we support our businesses by providing more opportunities for them to have additional spaces where we can bring visitors to our city that might have more parking opportunities in that particular area as opposed to Washington Street, and create competition so that the owners of their properties on Washington Street can't continue to hit them with higher rents. I think it's important that the changes in that area also incorporate mass transit. I'll echo, what has already been said about an additional light rail stop and expanding hop service. I think that'll be important to continue to get people into that neighborhood. But I also think it's important that we preserve that particular feel of that neighborhood. I think we need to hear from the community members. There are already people who live in that neighborhood. If you haven't been to Miles Square Theater, it's an incredible place and it's a special part of town. So as we continue to make changes there, we need to take into account the feel of that. It's not going to be the same as other neighborhoods, nor should it be. So I think we need to be very judicious in the way that we approve residential development there, have the right balance with commercial and retail to ensure that it continues to be another area of Hoboken that will flourish.
Mr. Doyle on North End Development.
Thank you. I think the process, Jason, that you were talking about is the master plan reevaluation process, which is ongoing, which is looking at the entire city, and supporting that is the build-out analysis that is complete, and it is a statistical analysis of what we have and what would happen if the entire city is built out at current zoning, so we could determine whether we want to make a change of course. As far as in the North End, there's 16 blocks up there. It's not entirely undeveloped. There are many zoning board approvals that are residential buildings up there, but we're advocating for transit, another bus lane coming up, the 126 coming up the west side of town on Madison or Monroe, so that the half of the city doesn't have to schlep over to Clinton Street in the morning. We're advocating, as I'm sure everyone is, a light rail stop there. I think it's a foregone conclusion that it will exist. It's just a question of where. And I personally think 15th Street rather than 17th Street is the location based on proximity to the next station, which is not very far from the 17th Street in Hoboken. We want to have pedestrian traffic over the light rail so that people who live in the shades can also access that mass transit. And lastly, we want the commercial we want to be predominantly commercial, not half residential, to be much lower scale than what I've heard other candidates suggesting.
Mr. Allen.
Well, I agree with my colleagues, Jim and Emily, that the development there should be focused primarily on commercial development. There needs to be an element of residential, though, to provide the people to frequent the new businesses that'll be there. But again, it should be focused primarily on commercial. And the idea would be is to design this area as an alternative to the Washington Street commercial sector to provide some relief to the Washington Street business owners and the pressure there on ever-increasing rents. If there is an option for a business owner for a location that is equally as welcoming and developed, the options for them to move elsewhere in town, I think, will relieve the pressure on rents on Washington Street. So it's a matter of economic development as well as simple, what is it going to look like? And that area also needs to, we need to make sure that there's going to be open space in that area. There needs to be options for transportation to and from that area. But what I want to reiterate is the unique charm and character of this town, I want to extend to that new development as well. And so that means I don't want to see large skyscrapers there. I think the 6, 7, 8-story building is what we need to focus on there, and I would hope that there aren't variances that allow for buildings that are out of character.
Mr. Starace.
Okay, it all comes back to proper planning. I really do think that we need to have a proper plan. I prefer predominantly commercial over residential and retail, but I would like to have residential and retail there as well. I think we need to get more infrastructure from the developers as they build, ask them to build maybe a multi-service center, help with the proper transportation, maybe a new multi-service center, like I said, and we can name it something different, right, Bob? I really feel, I fear population overgrowth. I feel that by building more commercial, you'll get more traffic in town, and I really do feel like we will help local business by doing that. Thank you.
Mr. Mello.
Yeah, I will concur on the thought that we need more commercial uses. We absolutely do. And we need the communal type of commercial uses, because I would disagree with the notion that was put forward here earlier that if it's privately owned, it's not a community give back. That's not true. When you look at things like Miles Square Theater, the movie theater, the beer garden, the upcoming rock climbing wall, and proposed bowling alleys, those are private enterprises that bring community together. They're places where people can gather, spend their money on a private use, but gather and get together. We also need not one, but 2 light rail stops in the northern area of Hoboken. We need one that's a little bit west of where the movie theater is, and then we need one at the farthest north part of the city so that if the Rockefeller Group eventually builds commercial there, we will be able to service it with a light rail stop. And as for the notion that people need to be put in there to support the businesses, well, that scares me a little bit, because that sounds a lot like what New Jersey Transit said when they pushed through too much residential versus commercial in the southern end of town. They kept telling us about, well, you need the people to support the development. We have the people. We're in a very densely populated area. The people are everywhere. We don't need to put them in new development 2 blocks away from they already exist. And last thing I'm going to mention on this is that I think we missed an opportunity to not tie the Southwest Park, the Southwest redevelopment area to the northern area. If we do that, we can transfer development rights, and instead of enriching somebody like Academy Bus, we can talk about them transferring their development rights and actually create a larger park in the Southwest like we've been promising for over a decade.
Any rebuttals on North End redevelopment? Go ahead, yes, Mr. Aibel.
Thank you. Just several comments on some of the comments that have been made. I guess I heard that there would be a Western bus line that would be a 126 bus. That's a fine idea, but we all know that there is a regional transportation problem, and at this point, the capacity at Port Authority allegedly is at capacity. So I think we need to take into account that we're not going to be able to plan irrespective of what reality is, and I'm afraid that's a problem. Second, small businesses, I think linking the improvement to the business environment on Washington Street to what could go up over the next 10 years in the north end is really apples and oranges. And finally, no one has mentioned open space. I think we have a BASF park that's great, but we have to make sure that our our land is permeable and allows for runoff.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Doyle.
Thank you. And Mr. Aibel, you misinterpreted my statement by spreading the 126 buses, however many there are, say there's 100 an hour or less, just spreading them over 3 routes rather than condensing them into the 2 is what I was suggesting, what we are suggesting. So there will be no more buses. We will advocate for more buses, certainly. We're actually advocating for some of the lesser utilized bus services in the suburbs to essentially have fewer buses so that we could get more buses so that the Port Authority, which is really the log jam, will free that up. There's also, I'm more in favor of all commercial and no residential because we want no more people in cars, other than maybe employees, but it would be great if they walked to work up there. And retail equals commercial as far as I'm concerned. So the beer garden as an example would be great. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Ellis.
Yeah, so when we talk about development and we talk about the infrastructure, we neglect to talk about the traffic that goes along with that. And quite frankly, we have a president that's in office that's talked about building out infrastructure. Let's see if it happens. But I'd love to see us explore options to increase ways in and out of town. Potentially linking Hackensack Plank Road on the north end to Grand Street over the light rail there to alleviate some of the bottleneck by the Lincoln Tunnel. I'd also like to work with the county to see if we can get a road finally coming out of Jersey City Heights on Patterson Plank Road and link it over to Jersey Avenue, because again, there's a bottleneck there. This goes into infrastructure, it's traffic infrastructure. Thank you.
Mr. Mello.
Yeah, I'm glad that the buses were brought up because that's obviously every solution that could even possibly happen we need to advocate for. But the better option, the more important option is that long term, they are currently planning out another tunnel that will take heavy rail trains into New York City. It is vital that we make sure that at least the footings, the type of infrastructure that needs to be there for a future stop to the heavy rail trains that's below the surface is set up now. Sometimes you do that in construction. In the city of Newark, where Panasonic headquarters now exists, the footings were in place for that building for decades before that building went there. When they are building the tunnel now is the time that we need to set up for that rail station to be in the north end of town. Even if we can't build it now, we have to put the infrastructure in place to make it a viable option in the future.
Mr. Allen.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, Mr. Aibel, I did mention open space in that area, so I just wanted to clarify to you and everyone else who was listening. I think that's an important element of our quality of life. But that reminded me of something I neglected to mention that is very important to our quality of life, and that's our arts community. And I think that development, the city government should focus on creating the conditions where artists and the art community can flourish there. It's a part of our city that makes us very special. And I think that the arts community and the artists should be supported to the greatest extent possible by city government, and that's something I know I would prioritize.
Anyone else? Okay. Not seeing any. We will hit the button. And there we have Mr. Mello will be first. Would you support requiring Hoboken police wearing body cameras? Body cameras on the police, and then after you answer that question, other thoughts you might have on whether our police budget, I'm just riffing here, but the police budget, is it too high? Is it just right? Is it too low? I'm curious about that. Mr. Mello.
I don't think there's an immediate need for body cameras, and that's something I would want to consult with the chief of police on. I think he's done a great job of leading our police department in the recent years since he took on that title. When it does come to the police, though, I think we need to do the things we can do to make all of Hoboken safe. Right now, our police headquarters is up on Hudson Street near the PATH station. And yet, I'm a commissioner on the Housing Authority, and there are deep concerns about whether we have enough safety in the Housing Authority. Now, we used to years ago have a separate precinct in the Hoboken Housing Authority, and we, for budget reasons, essentially, had to do away with that. Now, the Housing Authority does not have the budget to do it, but we have to ask ourselves if our community wants to do it. It's not only going to make the Housing Authority safer, where we very tragically had a murder within the last year, but it's going to make all of the area neighborhoods safer. I live in one of those. There is a demand for it to be safer. There's a concern. So that's the type of thing that I would want to spend larger amounts of dollars in the police department on is creating a precinct like that, more so than I would want to have body cameras.
Mr. Starace.
I agree as well. I haven't seen a reason yet in Hoboken, a major reason yet in Hoboken to have the body cameras. I do believe with the police department we need more beat cops around town. I think we need cops to walk on the streets a little bit. We need a presence on some corners for pedestrian safety. We have a lot of cars that are sliding right through stop signs. If you park a police car on a corner, even if you just park a car on a corner, you'll scare them into stopping. I think it'll help out with pedestrian safety. I do think that a police presence, when we got rid of the horse-drawn police department, I think that was the guys we actually had out on the street. I do think we need a bigger police presence on the street.
Mr. Allen.
Thank you. I would agree that there is no immediate reason why the police department needs to have body cams. But with that said, I'd rather not wait until there is a reason for it. And so, as a general principle, yes, I think that every police officer should have a body cam on them. I think we should explore the budget and whether or not that's something we can accomplish. But more importantly and more immediately is the presence of police officers, I think, is an incredible deterrent factor. And while we live in a very safe community, there are packages that get stolen out of lobbies. There are bicycles that get stolen regularly. And so we have to remain vigilant. We can't become complacent and accept that we are a safe community and this is Hoboken and things don't happen here. They do. So we have to continue to prioritize public safety. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, a greater police presence at areas of particular concern, like I mentioned earlier, the southwest entrance in and out into Hoboken. I think police officers there during rush hour could go a long way towards calming people who are coming into Hoboken and are aggravated and are dealing with the frustration of a daily commute. That implicates public safety, and I think that's one way we could address it.
Mr. Doyle.
Thank you. I would agree that I don't think there's a need for it. I don't know what the cost is. If it's $25 an officer, it can actually protect the officers from people accusing them of abuse, and so forth. So I think the question there is what the cost would be. But on the other points, I do think I agree with Councilman Mello that I would 100% endorse a mini precinct of some sort over in the Housing Authority, just to help response times for the entire west side of the city, frankly. And I also think that many of the nagging little problems that we have do come back to enforcement issues often. And so, the people who complain about cyclists on the sidewalk, if there's more enforcement, that would not be an issue, and people wouldn't be as hostile to cyclists. Parking, there are many of the small sort of annoying, giving out more traffic tickets to people who roll through stop signs, as was said, might very well be money better spent. Thank you.
Mr. Aibel.
I of course claim expertise in a lot of things, but police policies I don't. And I guess my view on this is that we need to rely on the good judgment and professionalism of our management in the police department. If there were a need for body cameras, I assume our chief of police would come forward and make that request. I agree that having the ability to service issues at the Housing Authority would be a nice thing. I know there are issues involving cost and how that is executed, but again, I think it's something that raising to the police chief and relying on the police chief's judgment in terms of how his forces are deployed is probably the best thing. Speaking about the Housing Authority, I think that raises a whole bunch of different issues that I hope maybe come up in another question. Thanks.
Ms. Jabbar.
I think it's very important that we trust our police to tell us when they need something. I think Chief Franti does a very good job. And so in concept, I do support the use of body cameras because I think it does go two ways. It protects both citizens as well as the officers in terms of creating a source of accountability. I do think, however, to go back to something that Councilman Mello brought up with the incident that happened in the Housing Authority last January with the murder of a young man, I think part of that issue was unfortunately the presence of a gun. And I bring this up because I've had the pleasure of working with Chief Ferranti on this particular topic, because it was something that I noticed when my daughter was in the pre-K program initially. I found out that she was going through monthly lockdown drills. And it really broke something in me, that this would be something that we ask our teachers to implement and that these children are experiencing, is that sort of the culture of that, of ensuring there are not incidents, hopefully. But I think what's important is that Chief Ferranti was incredibly responsive when I reached out to him on behalf of an organization that I started to organize with, called Moms Demand Action. And in fact, Hoboken actually distributes 200 gun permits every year. So if we think that gun safety isn't an issue in our community, there is a presence, and I think that incident showed it. And I'm very pleased that Chief Ferranti has now worked with our organization to hand out a gun lock with every single permit that's issued.
Mr. Ellis.
I'm going to echo what Jim Aibel had started to say. I'm not an expert at policing. I would rely on the professionals, the chief of police. I can tell you I'm against body cameras for a number of reasons. For our particular community, I do think they make sense at certain areas, but there's a cost to implement, there's a cost to maintain them, and then there's a cost to store that data. And
Just go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
I respect what you have to say, but for our community, I don't feel it's a necessity at this particular time. What we do need to do is have conversations with the chief of police to see what does the chief need to ensure that every resident is safe in our town. I also want to review overtime and staffing to see, does it make more sense to hire additional police officers? Is it actually more cost effective to bring more police officers on as full-time payroll? I do want to see more police on the streets, and I don't know if that's a product of the bureaucracy in the police department in terms of bringing a suspect in and going through the paperwork and getting them booked or arraigned. But we have a lot of police on staff, and I'd like to see more of them out on the streets, riding bicycles and literally walking the streets. The last thing I'll mention is enforcement, and we've all said this, there needs to be more enforcement of these rolling stops at the parks, on everybody's corner. Thank you.
Any rebuttals on the subject of police in town? All right, seeing none, I'll hit the button again. And there we have it. Mr. Allen will be first on this. This is about halftime, folks. Are we having fun so far? Is everyone having a great time? All right. I'm sure the candidates are. So this, I'm going to take a moderator's prerogative question here. If you were going to meet someone for either a beer or a coffee in Hoboken, and they were asking you where you would propose to meet for a beer or a coffee, your favorite bar or favorite coffee shop, Mr. Allen, what would you say?
Do I get to choose a coffee place and a beer place, or
It's up to
because I
you.
don't
If
know
you'd
many
like to,
places where I
that's
wanna do
your
both.
choice.
Listen, if I was asked to go for a beer, I would want to take them to O'Neill's. I think that has a great community feel. Now, it may not be beer, but they also have Wine Down Wednesday, which is always fun. But I think O'Neill's captures an element of Hoboken's community that I really appreciate. It's small, it's warm, they have live music, and you'll have interesting conversations there. That's what I love about Hoboken, and I think O'Neill's does a good job of capturing it. As for coffee, I'm going to go with Black Rail Coffee right by my house, right by the light rail station on 9th Street. They are an incredibly friendly group of people there. They serve an outstanding coffee, and it's also right next to my house. So, thank you.
That was a considerably more complete answer than I expected for this question. Mr. Mr. Ellis, your thoughts on beer and or coffee?
First of all, I'm an addict. I'm a Starbucks addict. I can't get enough of it, and I frequent the place on Hudson Street. I know it's not a small business, but I actually know everybody that works there, and they're fantastic. I'm a fan of Quirk City. I like microbrews. I love going in. I love that I can bring my dog in there and order in food.
All right, Mr. Aibel, on any alcoholic beverage, why don't we just say that, and or coffee?
Well, the best place to have a beer in Hoboken, as far as I'm concerned, is my front stoop. There may be an enforcement issue there, so hope everybody.
Yeah. How are the prices there at your friend's stew?
Prices are good. So I think I'll be coy with my choice for coffee. Again, I make a very mean brew myself.
Oh, okay. Mr. Doyle.
Finnegan's for a beer at 8th and Willow, and I have never tasted coffee in my life, so I have no idea.
Are you serious?
I hope I don't lose votes with that.
Okay. Ms. Jabbour.
So I also avoided coffee for a long time, and then I became a mother. And unfortunately, coffee is now a required part of my day. And coincidentally, I also happen to live right on 9th Street by Mr. Ellis and Mr. Allen. So I also frequent Black Rail Coffee because I have a penchant for their lattes.
Okay. Mr. Starace on alcohol and coffee.
I'm more of a coffee person, believe it or not. Buey on Washington Street. On Saturday nights they have a great arts open mic night. I'm a little bit biased because my daughter actually performed there a couple weeks ago, and it was awesome. It's really artsy and it's really great. Coffee's great too.
What did she do? Like play the guitar or sang or what did
She played guitar and sang actually.
Okay.
Yeah,
Was
my
she good or
14-year-old.
was she terrible?
She actually was her first time on an open mic like that, and she did really well.
Okay.
She did really well. Yeah.
Okay. That'd be funny if she was terrible. Mr. Mello.
For a beer, I'd have to go with the Northern Soul, which is right below my building. That's usually when you get the best feedback from the public, is when your neighbors are grabbing a beer with you. And then for coffee, because I'm afraid I'm going to lose them before this debate is over, I would say any coffee shop that was intelligent enough to hire one of my wonderful McNair students for a part-time job. So I have to give them that nod.
Okay. All right. Moving on. We'll hit the button. Any rebuttals, by the way, on beer places? No? Okay. Hitting the button again. Ms. Jabbour will be first on this. And this is a question. I'll have to try to balance it, but it reads, and there's been a number of like this. What's your plan for developing affordable public or subsidized housing in the city, or for improving existing stock? Or do you think there's already enough? Or do you think that maybe we could have less? So another card. What about low-income housing? This issue comes up. Ms. Jabbour.
This is an important issue to me. As I mentioned in my opening, I'm a social worker by training, so I think one of the things I most love about Hoboken is the fact that it's a diverse community. And I think we need to continue to ensure that a diverse population can live here. Unfortunately, I think that the prices have been going up and up when it comes to all of the new developments, and so I think it's very important that we find ways to continue to have affordable housing. Now, that can mean a number of different things, so I think there's a number of different ways to accomplish that, and it is a complex process. I know that one of the things that has been taking place recently is that the manuals have been updated by my colleague, I know Jim Doyle is involved with, and so I think it's important that we continue to be thoughtful about what we're doing from a development perspective. I know, for example, the Jackson Street project will include 42 units of affordable housing, which I'm very happy to see, particularly in my neighborhood. So I think we need to continue to look at that redevelopment process as it applies to possibilities for those sorts of givebacks.
Mr. Allen.
So in many ways, we're a victim of our own success because Hoboken has become a place where people want to live and they move here, and that increases property values and home values. So maintaining affordability for our city is something I think we need to take very seriously. And that means a multifaceted approach, not just one solution. We have to hold the line on taxes. We have to make sure that there's solid and fair rent controls. And I think affordable housing should be a component of every new development in the future. So the short answer is yes, I think there should be more affordable housing. And we also need to make sure that those who live in affordable housing qualify to live in subsidized housing.
Mr. Mello.
Yeah, well, affordable housing is really broken into two prongs, the rentals and the condos. As for the rentals, I'm immensely proud of the affordable rentals that I chaired a committee that created the first affordable rentals that we are building in probably well over a decade in the city of Hoboken. So the Jackson Street project that's currently being erected, it is 10% affordable housing. Now, our lawyers told us we did not legally have to do that because it came in before the requirement. We did it because it was the right thing to do, and I'm very, very proud of it. That's in the rental context. Now, when it comes to the condo context, the way it's working right now in Hoboken does not work. We need something like a community land trust, which Cheryl Fallick has long advocated for, where we won't get into the problems of condo ownership and affordable housing. Right now, if you build a condo building and it's over at 10 units, you have to make 10% of your condos affordable. But any financial planner worth their salt would tell you that that same family or individual that can qualify for the affordable condo will not be able to handle the carrying costs. They won't be able to pay the taxes. They won't be able to pay the condo dues. They won't even be able to afford replacing their finishes. A community land trust would be a better use of those dollars that developers use to build the affordable condos. Instead, we could acquire some of our historic properties that are falling the way of the wrecking ball and instead turn them into community land trusts that nobody would ever profit on in their lifetime, but they could live in throughout their entire lifetime and enjoy home ownership.
Mr. Starace.
I feel we should maintain affordability in the city. We need more affordable housing. I feel contractors should contribute more to affordable housing fund on top of the 10% that they build in housing. I think right now we don't have enough affordable housing in the city. I think we need to renovate the public housing. I really do think it's in horrible shape. I really think it needs renovation. And as far as rent control, I believe we should enforce rent control laws.
Mr. Ellis.
Yeah, so there are existing laws on the books in regards to rent control, and I know Jen has been a big advocate of protecting people that live in rent-controlled units, and I certainly don't want to see people displaced. I think the question is, we all agree we want more affordable housing. The question is, how do we do it, and how do we actually execute on it? I'm not going to tell you I have the answer to that, but we need to figure out how do we execute and start building these units so people are not forced to leave town. The other side of this is there was a property reevaluation a number of years back where you had a lot of long-term residents that have lived here their entire lives, and suddenly their property taxes doubled and tripled, forcing them to sell their brownstones and move out of town. That was a big issue, and my concern is with the way the growth of our town has continued and the contracts that have been negotiated, we could potentially have to pay more property taxes in the future, which if you're already on the brink and can barely make a $25,000 or $30,000 a year property tax bill on a brownstone, any additional increase is going to force you to sell. So we need to reevaluate that. Thank you.
Yes, I lost my place.
It
Who's
is
next?
I.
Okay.
It's a complex issue, but I do think there is a solution to it. I mean, first of all, rent control. I was one of 3 candidates with Ravi Bala and the mayor in 2013 who publicly said that we were supporting the no vote, which was to not change the rent control laws, which would have decontrolled many units that are currently under rent control. We have to draw the line and keep rent control protections as they are, in my view. Secondly, there's the 10% issue. In the past, the developers, before the Zimmer administration, developers were allowed to pay in rather than build units under their 10% required share. And they were paying in amounts that were well below what it would require to, if they had to build 2 units in their building, they would pay in, $50,000 rather than an amount that it would take to buy or build 2 units. So we have an affordable trust that is, it literally doesn't even have enough money to buy a structure in town, essentially, to rehabilitate. The CLTs are great, and I am all in favor of them, but the reality that we're facing is real estate in Hoboken is so expensive that these community land trusts that Councilman Mello pointed out just are not feasible. So, I think there are more buildings coming online. The Wonder Bread lofts are coming online. There are more units, but it's not enough, and we have to come up with more solutions.
Mr. Aibel.
Well, I think everybody has an aspirational goal to increase the affordable housing units in town. How we accomplish it is obviously the challenge. I think the idea of the land trust is certainly a good one. Could we take additional developer funding and create a sufficient land trust fund? I don't know. That's certainly something that would have to be evaluated. Most important, I think nobody's mentioned that there really is, I don't believe, any clear understanding of how many affordable units are currently available, how many are coming online. I don't think there's a count on the subsidized housing and what who occupies it and under what income criteria. So I think there's an area here for a very thorough review, all in support of increasing our ability to keep our population diverse.
Any rebuttals on this question? Mr. Mello.
Yeah, I'm going to try to respectfully disagree with my colleague, Councilman Doyle, because the community land trusts, they are feasible. They're certainly more feasible from a developer standpoint. You can ask any developer that you might come in contact with than building in a new condo unit, a unit that you're going to sell for far, far under market rate. That costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars often, and believe me, the typical developer is rather going to put into a tremendous amount of money into buying up our historic buildings, where we also get the benefit of preserving them from the wrecking ball. And also when it comes to feasibility, you know, the city recently dropped the ball on an opportunity where there was a historic walk-up building that was put out there to the city to use the money we already have earmarked for acquisition of affordable housing and to use it to buy this building from an estate. It was an estate of a person who had passed away, who long had a history of being a rent control and affordable housing advocate in the city of Hoboken, and they very much wanted their property to go to that use. Unfortunately, we dropped the ball on that.
Anyone else? Mr. Doyle?
Yes, I don't spend that much time with developers, notwithstanding some of the members in the crowd, so I wouldn't know that for a fact, but whether at Finnegan's or not. But what I would say is that I was involved in that particular property that you're talking about, and it didn't work. And it didn't work because partly because we didn't have a system in place to evaluate and spring into action within the time period for which the estate had to be, whatever the verb is, to conclude the estate. But you harp on the, excuse my use of that verb, but there was a very bad experience, we all know about it, at a certain condo in the city where you know, the home ownership was a problem, but in that very building there were 4 other units where home ownership is through subsidized, and there have not been problems there. So one bad experience doesn't mean that the whole opportunity is not worth endeavored.
Anyone else on this? All right, seeing none, moving on, I hit the button. And there we have Mr. Ellis will be first on this. Just to keep things interesting, I'm going to hop around town with 3 different development locations. Spend the time in whatever area you feel most passionate about, or you can skip around, but there's 3 places. And here they are. If given the opportunity, would you vote to approve the prospective hotel on the post office site? What, if any, conditions would you want to put in place? So there's the hotel that's in back of the post office, I understand. Number 2, recently City Council voted to postpone acquiring Union Dry Dock property for parkland. If you're elected, would you be willing to vote yes to authorize the city to use eminent domain if necessary to acquire Union Dry Dock for parkland? So second place is the Union Dry Dock. Number 3, what's your position on Newman Center redevelopment? The Newman leather, something like 1880s built building. So we got 3 places around town you guys can talk about as you see fit. The hotel in back of the post office, the Union Dry Dock, Newman Leather. Mr. Ellis.
Thank you. First of all, Newman Leather is a real interesting building with a lot of character, and it's primed for redevelopment. My concern, and I listen to a lot of people that live in that area, is that the local community was not involved, or take that back, they were involved to a certain extent, and then suddenly the door shut, and they weren't allowed to speak their mind on the redevelopment that was happening right next door. That concerns me. I had that happen in my backyard at the corner of 9th and Monroe. I want to say in what goes on in my neighborhood. And nobody knows your neighborhood best than the people that live there. They know the nuances. So when it comes to Newman Leathers, absolutely, there's going to be some type of plan, but I want community involvement. When it comes to eminent domain, I am against eminent domain. I use that as a last resort. We should have gone in and talked and had negotiations with Union Dry Dock before even discussing eminent domain. So I'm upset how the administration handled that. There should be more dialogue, negotiations, and that's a last use resort. Thank
All right, Ms. Jabbour.
I will choose to talk about the hotel. I know that we visited this earlier in some of the remarks, but I continue to have concerns about the fact that when that proposal went into committee, it had one level of height associated, and when it came out of committee, it had a much higher height. I don't think it was appropriate given the space involved. The size of that lot is very small, and I think to have another tower in our downtown is not necessarily what this community needed. I will reiterate that I don't think it was a community benefit to provide a banquet space. I don't think that that's something that's equivalent with park space. So I do not think that was a good enough deal in terms of what that brought to Hoboken, and so I disagree with that particular project.
Mr. Aibel.
Why don't I just continue on the conversation about the hotel? I was not there when that transaction occurred at the city council. I understand there were reasons why the hotel was granted a higher additional floors, and that went to the financials of the hotel. Apparently, after evaluation of those financials, the city council majority determined that it was appropriate to allow the height in the way it was designed, and the hotel creates a world-class hotel right next to the pass station, which will only benefit Hoboken. Union Dry Dock, certainly as a part of a continuous walkway and open space, is something that is highly desirable. We need to worry about the cost, and that is a function of a negotiation with someone who I believe is a local developer, a local owner. And then finally, Newman Leathers. It's a significant development in town. I think we all agree that it should be maintained. And again, I think Mr. Ellis was correct. The involvement of the community is essential on all these plans, and to exclude the community from these discussions is, I think, not an acceptable way of governing. Thanks.
Mr. Starace.
I feel with Union Dry Dock, Monarch, I feel like eminent domain should always be used as a last resort. Always be used as a last resort. We need to sit people down at a table. What I do is I negotiate. I pretty much negotiate deals through unions and developers and contractors. I think just getting something so simple as getting people to sit down at a table and talk about what we can do with that, with the site can be done. I don't think that we were able to do anything as far as sit down and negotiate. As far as Newman Leather, I was with Jason and Jim at a meet and greet right next door in the building right next door. And the people next door, their main concern was the fact that they didn't have any say in what was going on next door. And that brings me back to the community development groups that we talked about. We used to have them here in Hoboken, where people who lived next door to a project that was going on had some input what was going on, what was going to be built next door to them. It's going to affect them, and it's going to affect everybody in the area. So why not have community development groups come back? Thank you.
Mr. Mello.
Yeah, as for the Union Dry Dock, I want us to learn the lessons that we should be learning from the Monarch fight. And I was very proud to kind of cut against a bad habit and pattern that's been going on in this city, where we go into development fights, disputes, desired acquisitions with one plan. We don't explore other options. When the Monarch situation came up, all we had been going through was the courts, trying to fight them in the courts. We weren't trying to negotiate with the property owners to find a proper settlement. Then the property owners approached the city, and they approached us with what I felt was a Sophie's choice of taking the density away from the waterfront and plopping it into an area that my committee had worked for 2 years with the residents to try to make sure that a project would be at least bearable to those residents. And it was going to take those same residents and throw a much larger project right 1 block away from where we had spent 2 years negotiating. We have to learn our lessons from this. Certainly eminent domain should be on the table when it comes to Union Dry Dock, but it shouldn't be the only option we explore. It's a bad habit. We need to break it. We need to keep that tool on the table, but we need to explore all of the reasonable options. As for Newman Leather, I was proud to advocate for the movement of the bulk, allow the architect to do his job, his expertise, and it made the residents a heck of a lot happier when we allowed him to move the bulk around and create sort of a wedge-like building structure next to the building that's there.
Mr. Allen.
So first, with respect to the hotel, many of us have mentioned this evening what we want, which is appropriate development for our city. It's my opinion that a 30-story hotel is not appropriate for our city. The only 2 members of the city council to vote against this project was Jim Doyle and Councilman Ravi Bala. I'd like to be on the council to continue, like Jim and Ravi did, to protect our city's unique style, which does not include 30-story, or should not include 30-story buildings. With respect to Union Dry Dock, the waterfront is one of our city's most valuable assets. And I want to make sure that the waterfront is contiguous and is able to be enjoyed by our residents and our visitors. And so when it comes to the use of eminent domain, the vote that the City Council was most recently asked to take was simply to authorize the use of eminent domain by the mayor. To actually use eminent domain would then require a second vote. So what this would have done is provided the mayor an opportunity to use all the tools available to her to bring the owners of Union Dry Dock to the table, to begin negotiations. But the owners would understand that the city takes this very seriously. And I would hope, as I've advised municipalities in the use of eminent domain before, this can help set the parameters for negotiation.
And Mr. Doyle.
Thank you. As far as the hotel goes, there are loads of boutique hotels in Manhattan, which has higher real estate values than we do, that are 12 stories high. That property is zoned 12 stories. There can be a 12-story hotel there, and I cannot fathom why we're told that with the financials necessitate a 29-story building. It's one less than 30. But so I just, and there are zero givebacks. Councilman Mello earlier said a movie theater can be a giveback. Mile Square Theater, which is a 501c3 corporation that provides culture to our city. I agree with those things. This is a world-class restaurant which will charge God knows what for the top floor looking out over Manhattan and a ballroom that you'll get to rent. That's your community benefit compared to a 2-acre park at 7th and Jackson, which Councilwoman Giattino voted against. Eminent domain. The property owner had said, we will not talk to you. We're negotiating a deal. So it wasn't as if we just didn't bother trying to negotiate. And secondly, eminent domain is required by law to have a negotiation. So even if they have the authority, this sitting at the table will occur, and it will just give us more leverage at the table. Thank you.
Okay, so do we have rebuttals? And I first saw Mr. Mello.
Yes. Not to belabor the hotel point, but we're not talking, the people who advocated and wanted to vote against that hotel proposal, they weren't talking about a 12-story boutique hotel. They were talking about a building well north of 20 stories. Right? So we wouldn't have been trading out for a great reduction in height. But what we would have done is lost the meeting space, the corporate meeting space that's so necessary to support this commercial that everybody here has been saying we need in the city of Hoboken. You know, my wife used to have corporate meetings every year with an organization that she worked with that had a main office in Manhattan and a main office in Princeton. They would meet for once a year in this area. And they would always have to meet in Jersey City, because the Hyatt in Jersey City and I believe the Westin were the only two spaces that provided adequate corporate meeting space. We need that in our city of Hoboken. I would have had more respect for the people that were against the hotel project if they just said, don't build a hotel.
Other rebuttals? Saying yes, Mr. Ellis.
So, in full disclosure, I'm not an attorney, but common sense says if somebody's going to take my property via eminent domain, I'm going to dig my heels in and fight you tooth and nail. So, I don't think we approach this in the right manner. There should have been more discussions before just coming out with eminent domain, regardless of how this pans out. I want this piece of property for the city. I think it would be great, but we have to look at the cost. At what cost is it going to take to get this piece of property? And that cost might be way too high. So we need to sit down and see the true cost. Thank you.
Mr. Aibel.
Thank you. On the hotel, the Fund for Better Waterfront was instrumental in negotiating that deal to, in effect, complete the southern waterfront, and I think in a way that removes what is clearly an eyesore and an underutilized lot area from the post office. So I think it was an appropriate way of finishing up the waterfront, and I think very much when I hear that the fund was in favor of it, I realize that it certainly had a basis in one of the groups that has been long involved in the development of the waterfront and most concerned about the protection of the waterfront. So I was comforted by that. As to the Jackson pilot, Mr. Doyle is very glib in saying an acre and a couple acres of open space. It was an acre, a basketball court for a $128 million 30-year pilot. We could have built a community center.
Any other rebuttals? Mr.
Yes,
Doyle?
Mr. Aibel, I would, you're mistaken in that there was no deal, because if the Fund for a Better Waterfront had negotiated a deal for the hotel, they would have been breaking the law, which is what the city did 3 administrations ago, and my wife sued and won. We cannot negotiate with anyone until the plan is approved. So, and frankly, during the plan process, there were many, many meetings and discussions with the Hilton people that were, in my view, inappropriate. They were pushing the line on what you, because you're not supposed to be negotiating the plan. You negotiate the agreement after the plan is in place. As for the Jackson Street, which is not on our list in our question, we had a financial consultant that the city has used, and they determined what the pilot, I hope Councilman Mello will defend the Jackson Street project, because the pilot agreement there was vetted and thoroughly appropriate.
Okay, anyone else? Ms. Jabbour?
I would just like to go on the record to say that I support the use of eminent domain. In fact, when it was up for consideration at the council whether or not to use eminent domain in the Southwest Park, even though I'm a resident of the 3rd Ward up on 9th Street, I went to speak out in support of that because I think that neighborhood deserves to have a larger park. So I think it's important that we do have the ability to use eminent domain as a tool in the toolkit, and I think that's part of what's made Mayor Zimmer so effective. For example, the BASF site wouldn't have been financially feasible for the city to obtain until the use of eminent domain was authorized. And then the owners of that property had a far more reasonable price, and that is why we are now able to have that pop-up park.
Okay. That was a humdinger of a question. Let's move on. I'll hit the button here. And there we go. Mr. Ellis will be first on this one. And this question, do you support adding additional parking in the city? I will bounce the question by saying, should we have less parking in the city? And you can endorse that position if you so choose. If so, how will this affect traffic, especially during rush hour? And I would also just generally say, to ask all of you to be specific. If you have ideas for parking, where will it be? Can you tell us that? Mr. Ellis.
As I said earlier, we're not getting rid of the cars anytime soon. We live in New Jersey. I do a reverse commute. A lot of people in town talk about walking and riding bicycles everywhere. I know a lot of people out there also drive their cars, even if they're going 4 or 5 blocks. It's a reality. The issue that I have is we have residents that park their vehicle on the streets and only move them 1 time per week and use their vehicle for recreational uses on the weekend. That takes up parking on the streets. If you want to have a vehicle in this city and you want to use it for recreational uses, put it in a garage. I'd love to see alternate side of the street parking. I don't know if it's feasible. We have to see how many spots are available in garages, but we need to get cars off the street or at least moving on a regular basis for visitors, for guests, and for just to make it easier for parking. So thank you.
Mr. Allen.
So I am also shockingly in favor of there being more parking in Hoboken. I think one of the ways that we can do that is already on the city's agenda, which is to construct parking facilities on the periphery of the city. The idea being that if there's parking available on the periphery, it will relieve some of the pressure for parking in the middle of the city. I also think we need to revisit our no parking sign policy and the notice required when you post no parking. For example, if you're moving or if you're having a delivery, I think people need to have advance notice far in advance so that they can make accommodations and they don't get a ticket or booted or towed. And that's coupled with enforcement. I think that we need to be diligent in our enforcement, but we don't need to punish people. I think the city's gotten better at it, but I think we need to continue working on it. And technology, I think, an investment in technology that will help us to identify where open spaces are, technology that will help streamline the process of the applying for parking passes and dealing with the parking utility would go a long way towards addressing this issue.
Ms. Jabbar.
I'm going to echo Mr. Allen's comments. I think it's very important that we take an overall look at parking as a more complex issue. I think there are a number of different facets to that. First of all, the use of municipal garages. While I do think it's appropriate that we continue to build municipal garages, for example, what's planned for the Northwest Park area, the North Flap actually includes the building of a municipal garage. It's my understanding that currently those are being underutilized, the existing municipal garages. So we need to look at why it is that people aren't inclined to use those garages. And part of that is, I think, associated with the fee structure and the usability of working with the parking office. As John also mentioned, I think there are sometimes perceived predatory practices by our parking office, and we need to revisit how that's impacting our residents. The use of boots, is that really the best way to enforce issues with parking on our streets when you can't actually then move your car once it's been booted? And that hits you pretty hard in the pocketbook in terms of your ability to then get that boot off. So I think we need to take a holistic look. The third thing that I think that is part of that is looking at expanding our mass transit options. I'm somebody who commutes into the city. I use the light rail and the PATH train. I think we need to continue to work with the New Jersey Transit to ensure that the mass transit options are meeting the needs of our residents.
Mr. Starace.
This has been a problem for over 20, 30 years in the city. It's not going to be fixed very easily. I don't know how to fix it. I'm going to be honest with you. We can't just keep building residential. It's overburdening our city, and we're bursting at the seams here. There's nowhere for people to park, and services or taxes are going up because the services are needed. We need to focus more on commercial, like I said. Building residential as well, but focus more on commercial. Municipal garages in the northern end of town and the southwest end may be something that helps alleviate some of the parking, but it's not going to be an issue that's going to be solved very easily. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's going to be something that's going to be solved. The Hudson Tunnel project is going to happen someday. It may help people decide on if they're going to have a car in the city of Hoboken. I mean, look at Manhattan. A lot of people don't have cars because of mass transit. The Hudson Tunnel right now, my union in New York City is bidding work for the Hudson Tunnel. I guess it may be to budget to see what they need for federal funding. I don't know what it is, but that tunnel's going to happen eventually. And that may help alleviate some of the traffic in town. Maybe people decide on not buying cars. Thank you.
Mr. Mello.
One thing we need to do is we need to simplify, because we've gotten to the point where the system we have is very convoluted, and it also seems to be changing with the enforcement from a month-to-month basis. I worked with Councilman Cunningham to create where we have the red zones and the yellow zones, and I'm hesitant to say that because it hasn't been rolled out properly at all. What that was supposed to do was take away the suburban idea of having to park 50 feet from there, only being able to park 50 feet from the corner. And in the yellow zones, you could park as long as schools weren't in session. I got a ticket myself this week parking in the yellow zone when school wasn't in session because we're not enforcing it properly. So we need to simplify the system so that everybody knows the rules. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at people and said, I'm a councilman and I have a hard time keeping track of the rules. There's no way people in the general public are going to be able to keep track of these convoluted rules we currently have. And then when it comes to the parking enforcement is only meant to manage the system we have better. It's not meant to be predatory and fill the coffers of City Hall. Unfortunately, I think we've drifted to the point where that's what is happening. We are only supposed to give tickets because it helps us manage our system better. We also have to do a far better job of directing parkers into our long-term parking decks and have more long-term parking decks throughout the city.
Mr. Doyle.
Thank you. I'm a little more optimistic than Jason here as far as whether we can, in fact, do better, and the percentage of our population with cars could go down. But I do agree that there will be more people coming, and so that the number of cars will be very difficult. And Sal, thank you for not being a typical politician and saying that you'll solve the whole problem. But we are looking to put a municipal garage up on the northern flap of the pop-up park area. There's some resistance among the council, so I'm not sure if even that would happen, but the master plan calls for perimeter parking so that people, as Jason described, who don't use their car every day, they don't mind parking it and walking 8 blocks because it's not a daily stroll. There's the Southwest plan also has a parking lot that is part of that plan. And if that plan is implemented as it has been approved, there will be a garage there, but that's more of a public-private cooperation. It's not going to be a city-owned lot. And as someone just mentioned, you know, our existing lots over on Hudson Street I think they're 4 stories tall. They could be taller. There's not a whole lot of residential there as far as how many people would be upset with an extra 2 floors or whatever. So we have to increase our capacity of parking. We have to disincentivize people from having cars and more mass transit. Thank you.
Mr. Aibel.
Yeah, let me start with Mr. Doyle's comment about resistance to a garage in the Northwest. Part of the BASF plan is to have a garage on or near the property. The question, as I understand it in the council, is whether it's appropriate to have it immediately next to a major park, or whether there's some other option to locate it elsewhere in the west north part of town. Whether that's legally permissible under whatever deed restrictions or contracts are in place is another issue altogether, but it's certainly something that I think we ought to be looking at. In terms of the parking, I think probably I'd take it a different way. We have an impossible traffic problem in town, both at the north and south sides of Hoboken. Until we come to grips with the number of people who have cars or bringing cars into the city, we're not going to be able to solve it. And I think the real crisis for parking is ahead if we allow unfettered residential development to occur. We can create some disincentives for having people park cars on streets, increase permit fees, as unpopular as that may sound, but it's something that we all ought to consider. But I think we all agree parking is another area in which planning is most important.
Any rebuttals on parking? All right, seeing none, we hit the button. And there we have it. Mr. Ellis again will be the first here. What specifically about your professional background will be relevant for your role on City Council? We'll get a little personal, little Oprah moment here in the proceedings. Specifically, your professional background would help you out in this role is the question. Mr. Ellis.
It's a great question. I'm a financial advisor. I've been in business for 18 years. And quite frankly, I grew up on food stamps and welfare. I'm a single mother and had the struggle to get everything I have. So I'm a fighter. I also believe in integrity. And I had no ambitions to run for political office. But I got involved in certain projects in the town, and I got very heavily involved in protecting my investment in my condo association, and slowly became an ambassador to the building, and more or less an ambassador to the neighborhood. And when Jen Giattino asked me to run, I said, of course I would. I'd be honored to run with her. As a financial advisor, I'm held to a fiduciary standard. Been in business 18 years. I have no complaints, no record of any misdoings, and I would hope to bring that integrity to the City Council. Thank you.
Mr. Doyle.
Thank you. Well, 4 years ago when I was sworn in, I wouldn't have believed that my environmental law experience for then 26 years in the federal government at the US EPA would have been particularly relevant. But I have come to learn, number one, that the law is the law, as they say. You know, there are many things that I've learned in government for now 30 years that cross over into municipal government, state government, as well as the BASF site, for example, was an environmental site and under the DEP. And Mr. Aibel is correct that there's issues with the Northern Flat being a hotel or residential because of the environmental restrictions that the DEP has imposed on that property. But anyway, I think I would try to be succinct and say I think my years in government, which is not the same as the private sector, whether that you think of that as bad or good, and my years as an attorney, I think helped me on the council.
Mr. Starace.
I've said before in my opening statement, which I didn't get through the whole thing, I'm a business representative for a construction union. I've negotiated collective bargaining agreements, and I've done 3 over the last year. I've sat down with 2 sides that were far apart, and I've made them come together. 2 of my CBAs were voted on with 0 opposed to it. The other one was a very high vote in favor of the CBA, and it was a close vote. It wasn't as close as anybody would want it to be. But I negotiate contracts, and I sit down, and that's what I do. And as a business representative, it's very important to make sure that you sit everybody down to the table. I've been entrusted by a lot of people to negotiate these agreements, and I feel that I can be very helpful here. Thank you.
Mr. Aibel.
Yes, thank you. I've spent 39 years as a licensed attorney in New York and New Jersey. I hope you don't disqualify me for that. I represented private clients at a law firm specializing in real estate contracts, commercial disputes, and environmental law. For the past 17 years, I've worked for a major financial services company in New York, principally doing mergers and acquisitions, integration, and what's called a strategic program management involving cross-enterprise projects of enormous scale and value. So I think what I would offer up is that over the past 17 years, I've come to understand what it takes to get things done, and I would take those same skill sets to the City Council and look forward to driving planning in particular forward, because I think that's something that is just undervalued and underused.
Mr. Allen.
So as an attorney, and I represent boards of education and local governments throughout the state, I advise them on procedures, I negotiate on their behalf. So as an attorney, I deal with local governments every single day. As a president of a board of education and as a member of the board of directors of a major charity, I have direct personal experience with being a civic leader. As an elected member of the Hoboken Democratic Committee, I also have the benefit of knowing my friends and neighbors in my ward and district. And as an aside, my colleague committee woman is Tara Mullins. I happen to be engaged to her. We're going to be married in February. So she and I are also already involved in Hoboken local government. All I'm looking for now is the opportunity to apply what I've learned as a professional and as a community leader here in Hoboken, where I live. Thanks.
Mr. Mello.
Well, as a teacher now in Jersey City, I definitely think I've learned how to communicate issues in a digestible way. I never would have realized how much that was necessary until I served for many years in the City Council. It also teaches you empathy with all sorts of people, and to listen to people even though they have a different life experience than you. I think that's also important in public service, and that you need to service everyone. You know, when you're a teacher, you can't turn away from a student that's more difficult to service. As a city councilman, you can never turn away from a constituent that's difficult to service. You need to try to do your best. I have a law degree. I like to think I was sensible enough not to practice the law, but smart enough to get a law degree. Steve Jobs once famously said that everybody should go to law school, but nobody should ever practice law, so I think I've followed that advice. And then most importantly, my experience of 8 years of service on the City Council. I mean, I've learned a tremendous amount, and experience does matter. I get a little alarmed when people are so willing to toss experience away in the political arena. I heard that a question came up about that at the last debate. Well, you know, when we have surgery, we don't rush out to find the doctor with the least experience or fire our doctors after 4 years or 8 years of service. I don't think we should do the same thing with our elected officials. We have elections for a reason, and if the people see fit to re-elect somebody, they should be re-elected.
Ms. Jabbar.
My background as a social worker, I think, is a distinctly different background than other people on this panel. I think it's very important that in that kind of a role as a leader for this community, you don't always have the answer, and a lot of times it's more about listening and making sure that you're representing the interests of all residents, in particular because this is an at-large council position, which is a different position than being a ward council person. For the last 11 years, I've been very proud to be a civil servant. As I mentioned in my opening, I work for the Administration for Children and Families. What that has meant is that when I started my career, I worked under the Bush administration, then the Obama administration, and now the Trump administration. I have not always agreed with the policies that are being implemented by these different administrations, but at the end of the day, I take very seriously that I serve the American people. And in that role, I need to be sure that I do it with integrity and continue to do the best job I can. I'd also like to take the opportunity to bring up the fact that there are differences amongst the different candidates in terms of their political background, and that matters to me. I know that people have made issue about whether or not that actually matters to them, given that these are technically nonpartisan elections, but I think it does matter. Hoboken exists as part of the state of New Jersey. New Jersey is part of the United States. The policies that are happening at the federal level do not reflect my values, and part of what I would like to do in getting involved in local government is to set a different tone, more positive tone, and that is why I'm running with Ravi Bala.
Okay. Any rebuttals on someone else's personal credentials we have here? No. Okay. Oh, we do it, Mr. Ellis.
Sure. You know, the whole who voted for the president is being pounded down everybody's throat. And the reality is...
Use the microphone, please.
I'm sorry. It's being pounded down everybody's throat. And ironically, it's being used to divide the community that wants to come together. So I would like to put the Trumpian tactics aside and focus on the local issues, fixing the roads, putting the lights on, fixing potholes, that type of stuff. And I am going to make a comment, and I mean no disrespect to John Allen, he lives in my building. I've never once seen him raise his hand to get involved with the finances, with any building decisions, with shoveling people out of their cars. And I guess that disappoints me because now he's knocking on my neighbor's doors looking for votes, but never once did he offer to help anybody out in my building.
Mr. Aibel?
Yeah, I'm very sorry. I have to say I'm disappointed that Ms. Jabbar brought the issue of party affiliation up in a complete different context. So this is about who's going to be the best mayor in Hoboken for Hoboken. It's who's going to be most responsive, who will execute, and I think you are the voters, and you'll have to determine that. But I don't think it should be on the basis of anybody's party affiliation.
Anyone else? Mr. Mello?
Since people are bringing it up, it has concerned me that from certain corners of these campaigns that are going on, that these national issues have been brought up. You know, I'm running to serve on the city council again, and I'm more concerned about where we need a new traffic light, where we need a new safety measure, or where we can obtain a new park. Now, I'm not running with a Republican. I'm running with a mayoral candidate who is a police officer for his entire career. And I've been a teacher for 17 years now. We're about as stereotypical Democrat as you can get. I am proud to be a Democrat, but I do not think that we should be making an issue of the political parties of the candidates in a nonpartisan election. I think that's divisive, and I think our community can do without that. When I hear candidates talk about protecting my children from Donald Trump, that's my job as a father. Your job as a candidate is to do what's best for the city of Hoboken.
Anyone else? Ms. Jabbar?
Yes. I'd like to clarify that my job primarily as a council person would be to make sure that local quality of life issues are addressed. It is not mutually exclusive that I can care about what's happening in our local level and pay attention to what's affecting our residents at the national level. There are residents who have felt targeted by some of the policies happening nationally, and I think it's important for leaders to stand up and speak out when those things are happening because they do affect residents.
Mr. Doyle?
Well, I guess as the Environmental Protection Agency person here, I can see where I don't think it's party affiliation that has been alluded to, but I do think it's an individual in the White House rather than the party of the individual in the White House. And when climate change is being, our policies are being changed as fast as our climate is changing, I think it is a legitimate concern to be concerned about climate change in a city that was flooded with 450 million gallons of water, and it will happen again. So, you know, you have to take the good with the bad.
Yeah, Mr. Starace.
I believe this is a nonpartisan race at the local level, and I feel that Jen Giattino is a Republican, and Jen was voted by 8 Democrats 3 times to be council president. That's all I have to say.
Okay, so moving on, we're going to do one bonus question, by the way. We did it last time. I'm just going to do it again. Pardon? All right. Sounds like I've been vetoed on the bonus question. So what we'll do is hit the refresh. Okay, so Mary says no on the bonus question, everybody. That you can go up to her if you wanted to hear what it was. No. All right, so I'm going to hit refresh again. We'll have then closing statements. Again, we accept applause for these statements. Hitting refresh again. And Mr. Allen for the first closing statement.
Okay. I'd like to thank our hosts for providing this opportunity for us to connect with concerned residents. I'm running for City Council with my colleagues and friends, Jim Doyle and Emily Jabbour, and our mayoral candidate, Ravi Bala. Together with my running mates, we have crafted detailed, thorough, and realistic plans to address the biggest challenges facing our city: fighting overdevelopment, repairing our aging infrastructure, and safeguarding against flooding. As proud progressives, we will speak up for American values when they are threatened from any source, including from those threats that come from President Trump. Because it's the responsibility of citizens, especially civic leaders, to not remain silent in the face of injustice. Ravi, Jim, Emily, and I will help keep Hoboken moving forward, and we're asking for your support. Thank you.
Mr. Doyle.
I, too, would like to thank the QLC for hosting the debate. I know that you guys are not compensated, and perhaps time, it's a thankless task. And so I sincerely thank you for volunteering your time. Hoboken has continued to improve during my 4 years on the council and serving with the mayor and with Councilman Mello. I think we've made, and Councilman Bala, we've made good improvements, and we want to keep the ball rolling. Emily and John, I hope that you will include them in my request that you support me and Ravi Bala. Our plan is to work forward and fix the aging infrastructure. We want to implement rebuild by design so we can avoid the impacts of climate change. And we want to hold the line on taxes and have a responsible fiscal policy while doing all that. Thank you very much.
So thank you again to the QLC for hosting the debate. I'd be honored and really proud to serve Hoboken with Jen Giattino, Sal Starace, and Jim Aibel. I really want to improve a lot of the major issues that are affecting our city. Everything from quality of life. We see it every day. Parking, traffic, congestion, pedestrian safety, infrastructure. I mean, the list goes on and on. It hasn't changed. It's about time something does change, though. I'm also passionate about keeping businesses in town and making sure those businesses thrive, whether they're new businesses or old businesses. And as I mentioned earlier, I did survive on public assistance during my youth. I support Jen's commitment to keeping long-term residents here, and we don't want to see them displaced. I want to serve the city of Hoboken, and I look forward to doing so. Thank you.
Ms. Jabbour.
Thank you to the QLC again for hosting us. Thank you all for spending your time to come here as part of this experience and your voter education. I think that the team that I'm a part of has a very nice balance of experience as well as new ideas. I think that's an important, something important to point out about, Councilman Doyle and John and myself, along with Ravi Bala, who's been an 8-year councilman. I'm very committed to supporting a positive campaign. I will continue to do so, and I'm here to represent myself and tell you what I stand for, because I think that's what I can bring to the table, is to have a positive perspective. We've certainly held ourselves accountable to ensuring that we're giving very specific, concrete ideas in all of our policy platforms. So I think hopefully that has resonated, and you've seen that here today. Hoboken is a special place. It has a charm. We need to protect that. Mayor Zimmer has done a fantastic job. It has not been an easy job. Being mayor of Hoboken is a very difficult thing, and she has been incredibly effective, and I'm proud to have her endorsement.
Mr. Starace.
First, I'd like to thank QLC for putting this on. It's really been great. And a happy birthday to Jen Giattino. Today is her birthday. She's 25 today. I'm honored to be running with Jen, Jason, and Jim. They're three amazing people. I'm very honored to be on the same slate as them. Our city has that special feel of the Brooklyn neighborhood where I grew up. It is a combination of a small neighborhood with the options and choices available that only a large city can have. It's been amazing. It's been an amazing experience meeting the people of the city and discussing their vision of what Hoboken will be over the next 4 years and beyond. I want to be on the city council because I want to do what I can to protect our city and to ensure that as it grows and changes, it remains a wonderful place to call home. It's important to me that the city of Hoboken maintains its charm, invests in the future, and is fiscally responsible. Whether it be development, parking, constituent services, or anything else of concern, I can assure you that I will have an ear to the ground listening to what the people of the city want and acting on what they need. Thank you.
Mr. Mello.
Well, first of all, thank you to QLC for holding this event, and thank you to all of you who came out tonight. I do think experience does matter, and I think it matters possibly now more than ever before in the city of Hoboken. Additionally, all of Hoboken needs representation. At this current time, I am the only member of the city council that lives in the western half of Hoboken in market rate housing. It's being seen in our decision-making process. It's not that the older parts of Hoboken, maybe the relatively more affluent parts of Hoboken, don't deserve representation. They do, but they don't deserve all of the representation. I'm here to make sure that all of Hoboken gets represented, whether you live in a brownstone, a condo, the housing authority where I'm a commissioner, or a rental apartment. And also, I'm going to address kind of the elephant in the room. Recently an interviewer asked me about my loyalty. Well, the reality is there were certain tickets that didn't want to run with me, okay, that I've allied myself with in the past. You could ask yourself why that is. I say it's because I am loyal to one group and one group only, my constituents, the residents, and my neighbors. Thank you.
And please don't get up at the end of this, but last but not least, Mr. Aibel.
I'll be quick so everybody can get out. Thank you, QLC, and thanks everybody for being here. On November 7th, the voters will give their trust to a new mayor and 3 council members to chart the course of Hoboken's future and pilot the city forward. Deep understanding of the issues actually matters in this election cycle. As a council person for all of Hoboken, I will add to that understanding the good judgment and personal integrity I've demonstrated in my legal and business career spanning 4 decades. As 40-year Hoboken residents, Beverly Savage and I have established deep roots in this community. Hoboken is our home, and we can't see living anywhere else. Becoming a city council member was not on my bucket list when Jen Giattino asked me to join her ticket, but I suppose things work out for a reason, and I can't imagine a better reason to run for public office than protecting my own home. If elected, Jen, Sal, Justin, and I will serve solely in the best interests of Hoboken and all its community members. Thank you.
So please hang on 1 minute. Mary, you have an announcement?
Yes, quickly. First of all, thanks. Let me get to the mic. Bob, thank you once again. Bob. Despite having cut off that last question, we really very much appreciate your time.
It was going to be your favorite and least favorite things the Zimmer administration did after 9 years.
Oh, that could
Look
have
at the crowd. They wanted that.
Okay. Good choice, Mary. I also wanted to extend our gratitude to our videographer, Catherine Stratton, to our fabulous new friends, the audiographers from the Stevens Institute of Technology Audio Engineering Club, and to all of the volunteers who helped make this event happen, as well as all of the citizens who care enough to come out and who ultimately watch this on the videos. There's an awful lot of talent and commitment at the dais. It's quite apparent. And clearly this reflects not only raw talent, but also a real thoughtful consideration by the candidates of the issues that are facing us in our community. So I think that all of us applaud you for your willingness to take this on this mission. And I think that it's been a really great educational experience this evening, so thank you very much. We do have, I have 3 announcements, brief. The October 25th mayoral forum will be held at Stevens DeBon Auditorium in conjunction with Stevens Institute of Technology and the Stevens Student Government Association. Our October 19th Board of Education forum, which was to be held at Our Lady of Grace School, we were unable to get a critical mass of candidates able to participate, so we have canceled that event. Finally, Melissa Abernathy, who is one of our board members and is very involved in so many different organizations within our community, has asked if anyone is interested in assisting the Hoboken Historical Museum with their house tour this weekend to please next weekend, excuse me, the 22nd, I believe. Yes, to please get in touch with her. So thank you everyone for your time and effort, and we really appreciate it. Take care.